"Who's your CO?" The recruit mocked her, until she said, "Ask your Admiral," and he froze instantly. Nobody warned recruit Daniel Cho that the woman walking through the training yard that Tuesday morning was the most important person on the entire base. Nobody told him to watch his mouth. Nobody had to. That lesson, it turned out, was going to take care of itself. This is a story about a mistake, but it's also a story about what happens after a mistake, which is the part most people skip over when they tell it. Anyone can describe a moment of embarrassment. Not everyone sticks around long enough to understand what it was actually teaching. It was just past 0700. The sun was already cutting hard across the concrete, and the base was doing what it always did in the morning. Loud, fast, full of recruits moving in formation, boots hitting the ground in rhythm, petty officers calling out corrections from the side. 3 weeks into boot camp, Daniel was starting to feel like he understood the place, like he had a handle on how things worked here. That was his first mistake. 3 weeks is not very long. 3 weeks is enough time to learn a schedule, learn a few names, stop flinching when someone raises their voice. It is not enough time to understand an institution. It is definitely not enough time to start assuming things about the people inside one. He was standing near the equipment bay with 2 other recruits, a quiet guy named Foster who kept mostly to himself, and a woman named Reyes who had done 2 years in the reserves before enlisting full-time. The 3 of them had a 10-minute window before the next drill block, and they were using it the way most recruits did, leaning against the wall, catching their breath, saying very little. That's when they saw her. She came around the side of the main building on foot, walking at an easy pace, no escort. She was in her mid-40s, maybe a little older, wearing plain civilian clothes, dark slacks, a light jacket, a visitor's lanyard around her neck. No uniform, nothing that would make a person look twice. She moved the way some people move, when they know exactly where they are going and don't feel the need to explain it to anyone. Daniel looked at her, looked at Foster, looked back at her. "Hey!" he called out. Not aggressive, just loud, the way he called out most things. "Ma'am, this area's restricted. Are you lost?" She stopped, turned her head slowly toward him. The kind of slow that isn't uncertainty, it's decision. "I'm not lost," she said, simple. No edge in it, no apology either. Daniel didn't read the room. That was always his problem. Not that he was a bad person, not that he was cruel, but that he had a habit of talking before the full picture arrived. He had been that way since high school. His mother used to say, he had a mouth with a 5-second head start on his brain. "Yeah, but civilians aren't supposed to be walking around back here," he said, crossing his arms a little. "Who's your CO? Does someone know you're on base right now?" Reyes went still beside him. She didn't say anything. She didn't grab his arm or give him a warning look. She just stopped moving. Which, if Daniel had been paying attention, might have told him something. The woman looked at Daniel for a moment. There was no anger on her face. That was the part he would remember later. No anger, no impatience. Just something that looked almost like curiosity. The way a professor sometimes looks at a student who has just said something that is going to take a while to unpack. "You want to know who my commanding officer is?" she said. "That's what I asked," Daniel said. He even managed a small smile, the kind people give when they think they're being reasonable. She looked at him for exactly 3 seconds. He counted them later, in his memory, because those 3 seconds became one of the most replayed moments of his entire time in the Navy. Then she said, "Ask your Admiral," and then she walked away. Daniel opened his mouth, closed it, looked at Foster, who was staring at the ground like it had suddenly become the most interesting surface he had ever seen. Then he looked at Reyes. Reyes was not looking at the ground. She was looking at Daniel with an expression he had never seen on her face before, a kind of wide-eyed, flat-mouthed look that could only mean one thing. It meant, "You have no idea what you just did." "What?" Daniel said. Reyes shook her head, very slowly, the way someone shakes their head when words feel too small for the situation. "Who was that?" Daniel asked. Before Reyes could answer, they heard boots. Fast, purposeful boots. The kind that belong to someone who doesn't walk casually, ever. Daniel turned and saw Master Chief Navarro coming around the corner at a clip that meant business. Navarro was not a man who hurried for small things. In 3 weeks, Daniel had only seen him move that fast once, and that was during a fire drill. Navarro saw the woman. He stopped walking, and then he did something Daniel had genuinely never seen him do. He saluted. Clean, Sharp, arms straight. The kind of salute that is not a formality but a statement. "Rear Admiral Voss," Navarro said. "We weren't expecting you until 1400, ma'am." "Plans change, Master Chief," she said. "Carry on." She kept walking. Navarro watched her go for just a moment, then turned and scanned the yard. His eyes landed on Daniel. Daniel felt the blood leave his face. He understood now. The full picture had arrived, about 45 seconds too late, the way it always seemed to with him. Rear Admiral. 2 words that carried 30-something years of service, a rank held by fewer than 30 women in the entire history of the U.S. Navy, and the kind of authority that made Master Chiefs salute in the open yard without anyone asking them to. The woman he had asked, "Are you lost?" to, the woman he had spoken to like she was a confused visitor who had wandered past the wrong gate, was the person who had personally redesigned the advanced readiness training curriculum that everyone on this base used. She had more decorations than most people would earn in 2 full careers. She had served in places Daniel had only read about in training manuals, and he had asked her who her CO was. Nobody laughed. That was the hardest part. If the yard had erupted, if the other recruits had pointed, or someone had made a joke, Daniel could have buried himself in the noise. But it was quiet. Even the usual background sound of the base seemed to settle, the way sound does right after something significant happens, and the air is still catching up. Foster hadn't moved. Reyes was still doing that slow head shake. A few recruits nearby were very deliberately looking in other directions, which meant they had heard everything and had decided that the kindest thing they could do was pretend they hadn't. Master Chief Navarro walked toward Daniel and stopped close enough that his voice didn't need to carry. "Equipment shed, now." What was said behind the equipment shed, no one ever knew exactly. Navarro was not the kind of man who made speeches or put things on record that didn't need to be. He said what he needed to say in the amount of words that were required, and then he was done. Daniel came back out about 3 minutes later. His face was different. Not upset, not angry, just different. The way a face looks when something has shifted behind the eyes. He walked back to his position and stood there quietly for a moment. "You okay?" Foster asked, barely above a whisper. "Yeah," Daniel said, and he meant it in a different way than he usually meant things. That afternoon, Admiral Voss completed her inspection. She walked through 3 of the training blocks, reviewed documentation in the command office, spoke with 2 senior officers for about 40 minutes, and departed the base at 16:30. By every account, she was thorough and professional, and said nothing about the exchange in the yard. Not to Navarro, not to anyone else who would repeat it. People who have been in her position a long time tend to understand that an embarrassing lesson, delivered in public, is often enough by itself. You don't need to add anything to it. The lesson does the work. Daniel didn't talk about it much either. Not the right-away version of not talking about it, where you're just waiting for enough time to pass. The actual version, where you don't bring it up because you're still digesting what it means. What it meant, he worked out slowly over the following weeks. He started paying attention differently, not in a dramatic, "I have changed" way, more like a dial had been turned somewhere. He noticed who spoke first in a room. He noticed who didn't have to. He started watching how the people who had been on base the longest moved through it, quietly, without announcement, like they had earned the right to take up space, and no longer needed anyone to confirm it. He thought about the visitor's badge the Admiral had been wearing. She didn't have to wear one. She outranked everyone on that base. But she wore it anyway, because the rules were the rules, and people who have truly earned authority tend to understand rules better than anyone, not worse. That detail stuck with him in a way he couldn't fully explain. It wasn't just about rank. That was too simple a reading. The lesson wasn't, always check someone's credentials before speaking. That was the surface of it. The deeper thing was something about the way he moved through the world, the way he assumed he already had enough information to act, the way he spoke before he looked, talked before he listened, sized people up based on what they were wearing instead of how they carried themselves. The woman had not been offended. That was the part that stuck with him most. She hadn't called him out, hadn't humiliated him, hadn't even raised her voice. She had just answered his question in the most economical way possible, 4 words, and let reality handle the rest. That kind of confidence doesn't come from needing to win. It comes from already knowing you have nothing to prove. Reyes talked to him about it once, a few weeks later, while they were cleaning gear in the evening. She said something that stayed with him. The thing is, she said, she's dealt with that her whole career. People looking past her, talking down to her, assuming she doesn't belong in the room. She's probably had that conversation 100 times. She didn't need to make you feel small, because she's never let people like that make her feel small. Daniel thought about that for a long time. He finished his training in the upper quarter of his class. The recruits who knew him from that first month said he was a different kind of person by the end. Not less confident, but differently confident. The kind of confident that comes from listening more than talking, from watching a room before assuming you understand it. He still had the habit of moving fast and speaking first. Some habits don't fully leave, they just get quieter. But when it did show up, there was now another habit right behind it, one that hadn't been there before. A pause, a second look. The question he had learned to ask himself before his mouth got ahead of his brain. Do you actually know what you're looking at right now? Most of the time, that pause was enough. Years later, when Daniel was further along in his career, and someone asked him about a moment that changed him, he didn't talk about a deployment, or a field exercise, or anything with a dramatic setting. He talked about a Tuesday morning in a training yard, a woman in a visitor's lanyard, and 4 words that arrived just after the moment it was too late to take anything back. Ask your Admiral. He never forgot the way she said it. Not sharp, not cold, just clear. The way people speak when they have spent a lifetime being sure of exactly who they are. That's the thing about real authority. It doesn't need to announce itself. It doesn't need a uniform on a Tuesday morning. It doesn't need your permission or your recognition to be exactly what it is. It just keeps walking,